This is video 2 of Oxford's TSA test, and we are moving into the critical thinking section and looking at the first type, which is identifying the main conclusion. This is the most common type of critical thinking question, tends to come about 5 or 6 times out of the 50. It's probably the easiest as well. It's always question 1, so it's great that you know what's going to be question 1, and you can get off to as good a start as possible. I say it's always question 1, it's mostly question 1, but there are a couple of years that wasn't true, but mostly it is. So all of the questions will be phrased, these types will be phrased, which one of the following best expresses the main conclusion of the above argument, or something similar, just basically what is the main conclusion of the argument. You have to put your emotion aside. You have to put your views on whatever the topic in the paragraph is aside. You just have to look at the paragraph and identify what the main conclusion is. That's it, nothing more. And so my tips for this, my 4 biggest tips, first of all, fairly obvious. Look for the overall message of the passage. What is the overall argument? Every sentence in the passage is going to mean something. They all link to one conclusion of the 5 options. All of them link to that one conclusion. A lot of times, most of them will lead to something else, but not all of them. You want to look at what all of the sentences link specifically to. But this is the most important for this type of question, because later on we're going to look at drawing conclusions from the passage, which means that the conclusion is not explicitly stated. But for this type of question, where it asks for the main conclusion in any way, there's main conclusion and main conclusion, etc. When it asks for the main conclusion, it doesn't use the word draw. The conclusion is explicitly stated in the passage. It is there. So any option which is not in the passage, you can cross out straight away. And you want to do these by process of elimination. Straight away cross it out. The conclusion is always explicitly in the text. But how do you rule the others out? Well, you've got to think what leads to something else. So often you'll be stuck between 2 options. You have to think, do you go from, say you're left with A and B, do you read out the statement A, therefore statement B is true, or can you read out statement B, therefore statement A is true? Whichever one works better, that's the option you pick. So say B, therefore A works better, you pick A because that's the conclusion, that's the last therefore. So you've got to mind these, what we call intermediary conclusions. So you might say something like, the grass is green, so it has been raining. So it is not summer, right? I'm not saying this argument is valid, but I'm just, let's say the passage says something like this. This is an intermediary conclusion. You have concluded that because the grass is green, it has been raining, but it's not the main conclusion of the passage. The main conclusion of the passage is that it's not summer, because that is the final therefore. You wouldn't say it's not summer, so it hasn't been raining, or the passage isn't saying anyway, it's not summer, so it hasn't been raining. You're saying it has been raining, so it is not summer. So you pick the main conclusion, not this intermediary one here. So the other thing then is also to mind these little wordings. So often the passage will say something like, it is possible that a lot of people agree with this, and the conclusion, one of the options will be, everyone agrees with this, but it only said it is possible. So that's not the conclusion, because you've got to match the certainty of the passage with the option. If the passage is absolutely certain about something, the conclusion will also be absolutely certain. If the passage is somewhat unsure and it's offering counter arguments and it seems a bit tentative on the issue, the conclusion will also be tentative. So you've got to match the tone of the passage to the option. But the best way to do this is just to practice. My recommendation to revise is, rather than going paper by paper, which I don't think is very useful, is to do all of the main conclusion questions ever, right? So from the old BMAT, which used to be used for medicine, one of their tests is basically the same as a TSA for critical thinking, and from every TSA test as well. Just go through all of them and do all of the main conclusion questions, then do all of whichever type we do next, and so on and so forth, rather than going year by year, because then you get really used to each type of question. But let's do a few of these. So this is 2022 question 1. Pause the video, have a go yourself. You can. So let's see, throughout history, gold has been revered and used for expensive jewellery and ornamentation. But in the future, it will be prized for its practical uses rather than for its aesthetic appeal. It wasn't until early in the last century that gold's electrical conductivity properties were discovered. Solid-state electronic devices use very low voltages and currents, which are easily interrupted by corrosion at the contact points. Gold is such an efficient conductor that it can carry these tiny currents and remain free of corrosion, making the devices highly reliable. A small amount of gold is used in almost every modern electronic device, and it is predicted that within 10 years, more gold will be used in the production of electronics than in jewellery. Which one of the following best represents the main conclusions of our argument? So, I recommend actually reading the options before the passage. So I probably shouldn't have read the passage out. Because if you read the option before the passage, you at least have an idea of what the passage is about. But anyway, sorry, for the next one I'll do that. But in the future, gold will be prized for its practical usage rather than for its aesthetic appeal. That seems valid, so we're just going to rule out anything that is blatantly wrong. It wasn't until early in the last century that gold's electrical conductivity properties were discovered. Well, it's clearly not that, because basically it says that here, and from there, none of the rest of the passage relates to this whatsoever. That is not a conclusion in any way. Nothing about gold being an efficient conductor, for example, relates to this. Gold is such an efficient conductor that it can carry tiny electrical currents and remain free of corrosion. So you can see it's basically copy and pasting sentences as we discussed. The main conclusion has to be in the passage explicitly. So these are potential options. But again, does saying, it can be used in electronic devices, so it's an efficient conductor, doesn't really make sense, right? Even if we look at A, if we say in the future gold will be prized for its practical usage rather than for its aesthetic appeal, so gold is such an efficient conductor, that doesn't work. But if you say gold is such an efficient conductor, therefore it will be prized for its practical uses, that does work. That makes me lean towards A, and I can rule out C, because it's at best an intermediary conclusion, and at worst it's a premise which leads to this final conclusion, which we think is A at the moment, but we'll see. A small amount of gold is used in almost every modern electronic device. That's just not a conclusion at all. The passage is just not about that. And within 10 years, more gold will be used in production of electronics than jewellery. Okay, that is a potential one. We can't rule that one out as quickly. So between A and E, and again, you want to use this. This is the tie break. What option follows from another? Is it in the future gold will be prized for its practical uses, so more gold will be used in the production of electronics, or is it more gold will be used in the production of electronics, so gold will be prized for its practical uses? Well, I would say it's E, therefore A. I think E is intermediary because E is more of a fact, right? Or at least the passage thinks it's fact. It's trying to claim it as fact. A leans more to an opinion. It is more likely that you're going to say gold will be used in the production of electronics, so it's prized for its practical uses, rather than it's prized for its practical uses, so it's in electronics. So I would say the answer is A, and I'd rule out E. You can also sort of see, if you look at the last bit, say we take all of this bit, for example, is explaining why it'll be prized for its practical uses. It's not directly explaining why it'll be used in electronics. So everything just about points to A over E, but you can see how you're sometimes going to be left between two, and you've got to pick the best one. Here's another one. This is 2019, question 27. People are quick to connect attempts to... Oh, no, sorry, I'll read the options first, actually. So we've got people are quick to connect climate change policies. Acting against climate change more important for humans and for the environment. Nature has always found a way to adapt to large temperature variations. Human civilizations have not yet been exposed to really large variation in temperature, and nature will find a way to adapt, but climate change is potentially devastating for humans. Passages, people are quick to connect attempts to reduce the effects of climate change with the protection of the environment. However, responding to climate change is much more important for humanity than for nature. In the history of the planet, the relative stability of temperatures in the last 10,000 years is the exception rather than the norm. Nature has always found a way to adapt to large temperature variations, but human civilizations, all of which have evolved in the last 10,000 years, have developed in a period with unusually reliable and predictable weather. Nature will find a way to move on, but climate change is potentially devastating for humans. Okay, let's try and rule a couple out. People are quick to connect climate change policies with environmental protection. It's probably not that, because is any of this at the bottom really about that? Not really. It's not always the last sentence, but often the last sentence will give you a clue. Nature will find a way to move on, but climate change is potentially devastating for humans. Therefore, people are quick to connect climate change policies with environmental protection. It doesn't work at all, right? It would go the other way, so we can rule out A. B, acting against climate change is more important for humans than for the environment. Could be, I'll leave it as a potential option. There's nothing to rule out yet. C, nature has always found a way to adapt to large temperature variations. Again, if I go, Nature has always found a way to adapt to large temperature variations, so acting against climate change is more important for humans than for the environment. That works perfectly and leans me further towards B. If I go acting against climate change is more important for humans than for the environment, so nature has always found a way to adapt, it doesn't make any sense. The argument doesn't work whatsoever, I can rule C out. D. Human civilizations have not yet been exposed to really large variation in temperature. Again, that doesn't seem to be the overarching conclusion of this passage, which is talking about how nature has found a way, but humans haven't, basically. It doesn't necessarily focus on whether they've been exposed to this or not. And again, you can go D, therefore B, which works, but B, therefore D doesn't work, so you can rule D out. And E, nature will find a way to adapt, but climate change is potentially devastating for humans. Right, so again, we're left with two, we're left with B and E. Is it acting against climate change is more important for humans than for the environment, therefore nature will find a way to adapt? Or is it nature will find a way to adapt, therefore acting against climate change is more important for humans than for the environment? This one is more obvious than the last one, I think. Clearly, it's E, therefore B. It doesn't work the other way around. You have to read out E, therefore read out B, rather than B, therefore read out E. We can rule out E, the answer is B. I'll do one more. This is 2009, question 35. The options are: people are right to do whatever serves their own ends, even if it involves murder, theft, and deceit. The phrase morally wrong is not meaningless. One must accept that acts such as murder, theft, and deceit are morally wrong. It's always wrong to admire those who commit murder, and it is as true that some things are morally wrong as it is that snow is white. The passage is this: it is possible to think that someone is right to do whatever serves his own ends, including murder, theft, and deceit, and to admire his ruthlessness. But one cannot think this is not morally wrong. The phrase morally wrong is not meaningless. There are some things, such as those mentioned above, which would have to be so described by anyone who is not aware of the meaning of the expression. That some things are morally wrong can be shown to be true, every bit as decisively as, for instance, it can be shown that snow is white. It is not true that every moral question is a matter of opinion, still less of taste, personal preference, or choice. This is a more confusing passage. You just got to break it down as much as you can. Let's see what we can rule out. People are right to do whatever serves their own ends, even if it involves murder, theft, and deceit. I'm going to keep it for now. There's nothing that necessarily makes me rule it out, but I'm sort of unsure. B, the phrase morally wrong is not meaningless. I'm going to keep that as well. C, one must accept that acts such as murder, theft, deceit, morally wrong. It isn't this because it says that here, so it is explicitly in the passage, which is fine, but the rest of the passage is not related to that whatsoever, right? Obviously, it's true, or the passage is certainly arguing it's true, but it's not the actual conclusion of the passage. So again, you put emotion aside, you put what you think is fact aside, and you just think, what does the whole passage relate to? And it's just not that. D, it's always wrong to admire those who commit murder. Again, it's same as C, it's just not what the passage is overall referring to. E, it is true that some things are morally wrong, as is that snow is white. That's definitely not the conclusion. Again, it might be a true fact, but it's not the overarching conclusion of the passage. So actually, C, D, and E are wrong simply for being totally irrelevant, rather than any sort of techniques that we've discussed before. So we're left with A and B. And again, you see what follows from the other. Is it people are right to do whatever serves their own ends, even if it involves murder, theft, and deceit, so the phrase morally wrong is not meaningless? Or the phrase morally wrong is not meaningless, so people are right to do whatever serves their own ends? I think it's A, therefore B. So I would rule out A and put B. If you're still unconvinced, go through the passage. You'll see that if I say people are right to whatever serves their own ends, it starts here. It is possible, right? This is what I talked about earlier. It is possible that this is true. That is a bit of doubt. And in fact, the rest of the passage contradicts that. This is absolute certainty. It's not matching the tone whatsoever. I only really kept it in because it seemed to be quite promising at the start, but then you realise the rest of the passage doesn't talk about it. The answer is B, because it can't be any of the others, effectively, on this one. Well, say for these two, we worked out exactly why it was A and B. This one is B simply because it cannot be any of the others. And sometimes in the TSA, that's what you've got to do. That wraps that up. I will, however, make a video going through all of the TSA's questions on main conclusions in one sitting, but not at the moment. That will be a different video. This was just an explanation. Hopefully it helps. See you in the next video.